Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for coming to this OTF Connect session on inquiry. My name is Susan Watt, and I'm a semi-retired educator from the Waterloo region. This is one of the things that I do in my retired life. And I'd like to welcome Elaine McKenzie tonight, who is a digital literacy support teacher in the WRDSB. She and I were actually colleagues for my last few years of work before I retired. She was always my go-to person when it came to needing information about library or inquiry or resources, and she's just a wealth of knowledge. She's a very experienced presenter, but this is her first time with OTF Connect. So a very warm welcome to Elaine, and welcome to all of you as well. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm going to turn off my microphone now and turn things over to Elaine. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I've been playing around a bit with my microphone. If anyone is having problems hearing me, feel free to let me know, and then we can get started. I'm actually looking at my first slide, and I already see a mistake. For those of you that work at our board, know that we've moved to Gmail as our primary email, and I'm noticing that my email addresses on the slide are not correct, but I can fix that later. So we're going to get started with inquiry and research. I find for a lot of teachers, approaching inquiry is a very stressful I guess, mode of teaching. When I first started doing inquiry, it was stressful for me. It was a different approach to doing things. And I'll be honest, it can be very, very ugly and a lot of work when you first start doing it. But it's really worthwhile once you get going. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. So this is a quote from Anita Brooks Kirkland. And for those of you who are in the library world, you might have heard of Anita anyway. But she used to be our board's library consultant, and she has been a mentor for me. I actually worked with Anita years ago at an elementary school in Cambridge, and she's continued to be a positive influence. But she gives the definition of what knowledge building centers are, and I'm going to go into more detail as we go along as well to give you a better understanding of what they are. So a KBC, or a Knowledge Building Center, is simply an online presence of a particular learning experience. Ideally, they're collaborative, they're online, they're interactive, and for me, the primary purpose of them is it allows teachers and students to work collaboratively untethered. So they're not in a single location. Learning can take place anywhere, anytime, 24/7, and we provide the tools and means for students to be able to do that. If I'm talking too fast too, please shout out and let me know. I did not invent the concept of knowledge building centers, although I really like the idea of them. They were created based on the work that was done by Dr. David Lurcher, who's actually based out of San Jose University in California, and Carol Cushlan, who used to be a teacher librarian for the Toronto District School Board, I believe. She's still very active in the library world as well. I provided links on the slide deck that you all have, and Susan can provide links in the chat page, but any of the links will also provide more information in knowledge building centers to give you a bit more of an understanding. I've also included some additional slides here with lots of different information. A lot of it is based on the work that David Lurcher himself has done. Also the work that Carol Cushlan and Anita Brooks Kirkland have done. And the last link there is Anita Brooks Kirkland's website. She continues to be very active in the library world now that she's retired from our board. Now, when I approach inquiry, there's lots of different models and approaches to take, but my background is teacher librarianship as well. And so the model that I use is based on the work outlined in the Together for Learning document. This is a document put together by the Ontario School Library Association. And so we have a link in the chat for you to have a look at, so you can actually get a PDF copy of the book. We've also got links below, or we'll put links below for a poster, for the inquiry poster in English and in French. And it just sort of outlines the discovery and guided inquiry model that I'm going to be talking about tonight. anything I'm showing you tonight with inquiry, you could substitute any different kind of model that you want to put into it. I just kind of like this one because it's simple. It's got 4 phases, and I work through each of the 4 phases when I'm working with classes and students. So the first knowledge building center I'm going to show you, the first one I ever attempted, I was working with Anita Brooks, Kirkland again, and we decided to do a knowledge building center using the Titanic as an inquiry. So I think I'm going to use the application sharing tool. Susan's provided the link that you can actually go in and see the site as well. But I'm going to go, if I think I can do this correctly, take you to my web page so we can have a look at what.
Okay, so just while Elaine is getting that set up, I said I would talk a little bit more about this when we get going. So what we're going to be looking at on the whiteboard area instead of Elaine's slideshow is actually Elaine's desktop of her computer. And she's going to be taking us to this Titanic site. When Elaine's doing this, she is not able to see the Blackboard window anymore, so she can't see the chat, but she can absolutely hear us. So I'm going to ask you maybe if you have a question or a comment during Elaine's application sharing, if you put it in the chat, it'll be me that answers it or Elaine afterwards, but by all means, just click on the talk button and turn on your microphone, and that will let you ask your question to Elaine. So we'll still hear her once she gets going. How's it going, Elaine?
That's an excellent question. I'm having trouble getting to my page. This is such a great learning opportunity for everybody.
Absolutely. Here we go. We practiced this yesterday. It was smooth sailing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Susan, sorry, I'm in the sharing selection, the desktop, and I don't have it. I have opened all those tabs for myself in Firefox, and it's not showing up the one that I want.
And you're using Firefox for everything, and you don't have another browser open.
No, I might have. Let me close Chrome just in case.
Yeah, I would say maybe do that. Let's go back to let's stop application sharing, and take a minute. So I wonder what happens if I click. I'm going to click on whiteboard. Yeah. Okay. So I think I've brought back whiteboard for all of us. So you just take a minute and maybe close that browser, and we promise.
Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah. No, you never know. I was just saying we practiced this yesterday smoothly.
Yeah. Go figure. All right. Let me try this one more time.
Yeah. Try it again, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, I'm still not seeing it, so I'm not sure quite what I've done.
Just while you're playing there, Elaine, Robert's question. It's not on YouTube, no. We record them, and there's a resource page that I will be working on during the session tonight, and you will get an email tomorrow with a link to that. So it's a resource page that's actually right on the OTF website, and the link has all of Elaine's resources listed as well as the recording of this session. Elaine, when we practiced yesterday, were you using Firefox?
I was. It looks like it's coming. It's saying select start sharing to start application.
Okay, perfect. So. Good.
Okay. Okay, now I see it. Sorry, folks. Looks like it's coming.
Okay, good. There we go. Yay! Yay! Testing your patience. Okay, I'm going to turn my mic off now. But folks, if you want to ask any questions, go right ahead, take the microphone, or put them in the chat.
Okay, sorry. So this was one of the first inquiries I did using a knowledge building center. I want to be clear, a knowledge building center is just an online platform. So I'm choosing to use Google Sites. You could use Weebly. You could use any kind of online platform you want. I just happen to use Sites because we are a Google Apps for Education board, so it's pretty seamless for my students to be able to use Sites. I will point out that I am using the classic version of Google Sites right now, simply from the fact that the new version of Sites doesn't allow me to create templates right now. And I'll go into more detail about that later, but just so you know, this may look different from Sites that you're using right now if you're using the newer version. So this was probably, I think, maybe 4 years ago, maybe longer. We did a Titanic inquiry. So this is a template that already exists that uses the 4 phases of inquiry that are outlined in the Together for Learning document. So how we usually start doing the inquiry is you try and do some kind of provocation or hook to try and get them interested in the topic. So we had went out, and this was around the anniversary of the Titanic sinking, and so we had found some different images that we posted on this site to get the kids wondering about things. Because what we were looking for is what they actually knew about the Titanic and what they didn't. And what was really eye-opening for us and made us feel very, very old was that the students didn't realize the Titanic was a real event. They all thought it was based on the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. So that was a learning for us. And when you're doing an inquiry, you kind of want to know what the kids already know and what they don't know, and how much front-loading of content that you have to go forward with. So we posed this question: why are we so fascinated by this Titanic? Because kids love reading about this. The movie's still popular. I think the anniversary of the movie is coming up. I think it's been like, what, 20, 30 years? So we posted this question. Then we went on to the different phases. So phase 1 in exploring is the first, and I would say the most important phase when you're looking at doing inquiry with kids. This is trying to figure out what they know, what they don't know, and what we need to provide them in terms of resources to go forward. So we used a tool called Scoop It, and some of you are maybe familiar with this tool. It's a curation tool. And I'm going to talk in more detail about a lot of these tools later on, but I'm just going to show you what it looks like right now. Now, we were really lucky. At the time we were doing this, there were tons and tons of articles in the newspapers about the Titanic. Okay, so we took some time and we just curated lots and lots of articles for the kids to read to give them a bit of background. Okay, I'm going to go back again. So we gave them time to get familiar with what happened in the Titanic, and then we posted some questions. What questions do you have? What are you wondering about the Titanic disaster? The next tool we used was a tool called Linoit, and maybe some of you have used it as well. I'm going to click here to show you what it looks like. It's basically a word wall, and it's a great way for kids to be able to contribute their wonderings and questions in a very non-threatening manner. So we shared the link and made it possible for the kids to anonymously post their questions or wonderings. Okay? So all they would do if they wanted to post something is they would take one of these little stickies over here, and they would post their question. They could type it in. You can change the color, all kinds of things like that, and then they would post their question on the board. You can add video and images and stuff like that. So we just wanted them to, what were they wondering about having read the articles that we shared with them, or what were they wondering based on the movie, things like that. So, you know, were any of the characters in the movie Titanic real? Have they built a ship like the Titanic since? How factual is the movie Titanic? You know, how many people survived? One of the questions the kids asked, you know, did the musicians that were playing in the movie actually exist in real life, and did they go down with the ship, kind of thing? So we just wanted to figure out where they were at with their wondering. So once we had them post their wonderings, because this is what was ultimately going to guide their investigation, right, their wonderings, because that's what was going to help them develop their questions to go forward. Okay. So, sorry, I was just looking at the chat quickly. So then we asked them what did they want to explore more in detail. So then we have links here that we build in, and so we went to resources. And in our library, the WRDSB, we have a Library Learning Commons, a virtual library. We post a lot of resources on how to do research and develop questions. So we attached graphic organizers for kids to use to develop their questions. So I don't know if you'll be able to see this. I might have to. Nope. So I'll probably log in later to show you what our online library, most boards have their own version of this. So we had different graphic organizers we used to help them develop their thinking around what they were trying to investigate. And again, we have all these built-in tabs that we go back. I wonder if it will let me open this. Let's show you. So again, this is an example of how we get them to develop their questions that are ultimately going to guide their investigations. I probably spend the most time in this phase, the exploring phase, and helping them develop questions, because if they don't develop really good questions, the next phases don't work very well, as you'll see later on when we go into some more examples. By the way, anything that I have posted here or shared the links, you can take anything off of these websites and use, even if it's just the graphic organizers or the hooks or anything, feel free to use those. Our assessment at this point, here's some more information. If I'm going too fast, just tell me to slow down. We talk about the different phases of inquiry, but we also talk about high-yield instructional strategies. I embed this in for students so they have an idea of what we're looking for in terms for each phase of the inquiry. I'm trying to think here. Okay, so I'm just going to go on to the phase 2. So once we have the kids do their wonderings, coming up with questions for this particular inquiry, we had them go to various places to do their research. And because ours is a password-protected virtual library, as most boards are, I won't be able to take you into some of these right now, but we just reminded them for research starting points how to get the information. For general reference, we would use encyclopedias. Newspapers are a good example of primary resources, that kind of thing, to help them answer their questions. Phase 3, once they've gathered their information, we would have them look at synthesizing their information and seeing if they've actually answered the questions they were trying to answer. For this particular task, we were trying to do it in a couple of periods. So we had them, generate their questions, their wonderings, do some investigations, and then come up with 2 or 3 sentences that could summarize their findings, right? Identify their best information source, and then we had them create a really quick task where we had them all create a slideshow, we created a slideshow and each of them had to do a slideshow. So why were we so fascinated by the Titanic? They had to develop a question, a short summary, identify your best information source, find a picture they could contribute to sort of illustrate an answer to their question or what they were wondering about, and then we just had them share their slideshow. This is a really quick Titanic inquiry that we did. It wasn't something we spent weeks on. It was a quick little thing, and again, we went through all the phases to get to that point. Okay, so I'm going to get out of this, and so I've got lots of tabs open. So I should have taken you back to the main page before. So I'll go on to the next slide. So I have done a couple of different, since that time, knowledge centers and inquiries. The next one I did was social justice in Canada's First Nations. And I was working with a teacher here who, her primary focus was social justice, but in particular with an Indigenous focus. Okay, so what were some of the challenges and issues facing Canada's Indigenous people, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit? And prior to us getting started on this inquiry, she had been reading the book Shannon's Dream to her students. So that was sort of our provocation, because they were dealing with a lot of the issues covered in the book, and we wanted to do a more of a investigation about some of those challenges. So I'm going to go back into the applications sharing menu again, and hopefully I will have worked this just fine. Just let me go back.
Come on, Blackboard, let's go.
It says it's coming. looks like it's there. Okay. So again, I always try and provide a hook or provocation for the kids to get thinking. So they've been doing a lot of discussion in their classroom with their teacher about Shannon Stream and some of the challenges about First Nations communities, about not having access to a school, you know, having to boil their water, not access to health issues and supports. So I usually try and find a quote or a provocation to get them thinking. Luckily, they've been doing a lot of reading in their class and discussing stuff, so I didn't have to provide a lot of content for them ahead of time. So for this particular one, Phase 1 Exploring, again, I use Scoop It. I'll go into more detail because Scoop It can be a bit tricky to use. But again, I just started curating all kinds of articles on Canadian Indigenous issues. I set it up so I was looking at things about, you know, access to clean drinking water, mental health services or lack thereof, schooling, family and children's services. There's a disproportionate number of Indigenous children that end up in foster care. And we were kind of looking at what were some of the issues, underlying issues going on. So I'm still curating articles. So I'm just trying to find stuff that could give the students a bigger understanding of some of the challenges facing our Indigenous communities in Canada. When I first did this unit, Idle No More was really taking place and getting really ramped up, so there was a lot of stuff in the news. So as you can see, lots of different articles. And we gave these kids, this is a grade 5 class, we gave them a bit more time to go through and look at some of these articles because this was going to be a much longer unit of study. Oops, sorry, I gotta get back in my, oh dear, sorry. There we go. Got too many tabs open, my apologies. So once they did some wondering and some of the challenges facing Indigenous people in Canada, I had them use Linoit again. I should point out during this particular unit of study, I only had access to iPads in the classroom. So I had to make sure everything I was sharing with the kids would be, it would have to be able to work in an iPad. So to be able to do the work, they'd have to be able to access everything that I was giving them. So Linoit, I've shared the link with you that you can see in this site, but I actually created QR codes for the kids so they could come in, just use the iPad, scan the link to the Linoit tab, and then they could post their wonderings. Oh, sorry, Robert had a question I just saw. The presentation, I would share the whole site with the kids right at the beginning, but then we would work through each phase as we went along. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, you can post another question. So these are the things that kids were wondering about some of the articles they had read. One of the students had noticed that suicide rates seem to be higher in Aboriginal reserves. Why aren't they being treated fairly? Just different things that they were wondering about, and we were using these wonderings to help them develop questions that were ultimately going to help guide them in their research. So you can kind of look at some of the questions that they were asking. Even good questions like why don't Aboriginal people have healthy communities? So what's going on in those communities where things are not going on? They need. Okay. So again, I'm back in the phase 1 exploring of it. So then once we've done some of that, again, I go to the phase 1 resources. And again, we spend a lot of time getting them thinking about what kind of questions they were going to develop to answer their wonderings. Okay. Their graphic organizers are all listed down here below. There's links to assessment. And I work collaboratively with the teachers to develop these. So they could post their own graphic organizers. They decide what they're going to use for assessment tools, but then we could work collaboratively on a lot of this stuff. Once we'd spent time on this, we would go to the next phase. And again, as Robert asked, I would go through each phase of the investigation, or each phase of the inquiry with them. So for this particular unit, we have a virtual library. I wonder if I logged on from home and you can see what I'm talking about. So this is our virtual library. Hopefully those of us joining from our board have seen this before, and those that are not, I imagine you have a similar one at your board. So this is our ebook, audiobook collection. We have databases, etc. Hi, Melanie. Yeah, I do use a Q chart to have students develop questions. That's a great resource as well. Our Q matrix, some people have maybe heard that, and that's especially for younger students who haven't done a lot of work at developing questions. I've used that as well. So this is where we usually send the kids to do their research. I'm not a big fan of sending kids out just to Google things without having them, have a lot of experience and showing them how to search appropriately online and efficiently, okay? So I always send them here first, and if they can't find what they're looking for, I will, down at the bottom here, you can see where I will often add different links for them to go. So for the ones that had to go out of our board, Library Learning Commons, I put a little bit of information about how to evaluate resources if they needed to go outside and do a web search in Google or whatnot. There's a little slideshow I created for them. I'm going to go back. I also had to go out and find helpful links for them. And it's not going to do that. So when I was working with the students and we discovered, or I was listening to some of the questions that they were asking, and where their research seemed to be guiding them, I would go out and find links that I could post here that they could investigate while I was there if I wasn't in the classroom, because I wasn't there every day. So Statistics Canada, Aboriginal Mental Health, lots of resources that I felt would help them answer their questions. Okay. And this is also under the investigating phase. I probably spend the most time here, phase 1, exploring, investigating. Because if these two are not done well, when they get to the phase 3 where they're processing the information, we often find that they don't have information that has answered their question, or maybe they've gone off on a different tangent, or their topic is so big, it's not able to be answered in the scope of what we're trying to do in the class at that given time. So processing, again, I use a lot of graphic organizers. You could do whatever you want to use in terms of helping them synthesize what they've collected. Again, I just had them write 2 or 3 sentences summarizing their findings. I wanted them to identify their best information source, and let me see what I had here. So these are just, again, different graphic organizers that I use with the kids, identifying similarities. They're all posted here, so you're welcome to have them. They're also in our Library Learning Commons for those of us that belong to the WRDSB. Okay. Phase 4 is where they share their learning. So again, we looked at what we were trying to build our inquiry on, like why is social justice such an important issue facing all Canadians, in particular our Indigenous communities. So we provided a graphic organizer. They had to identify the topic. They had to indicate who their audience would be. So we decided for that class that their audience was each other. They were going to be teaching each other about some of the challenges that that Indigenous communities in Canada were facing. They had to state the purpose. They were there to inform, okay, and the medium that they wanted to share their learning. So their assignment was to state their 2 thick questions. We had done a lot of work ahead of time about thin and thick questions, recognizing that you need to answer the thin questions, the who, the what, before you can answer the thicker questions, like the why. So we had them state their 2 thick questions that we spent a lot of time developing, and then they had to do a short summary of what they found out for each question. They could choose any medium or tool that they wanted to show their learning, and so we gave them a bunch of options. And most of them chose to do either a keynote presentation or a slideshow, or iMovie or a video presentation. And I always provide links on how to find copyright-friendly images to use in their projects, that kind of thing. I don't actually have their videos posted because I don't have permission from all the students to share their work with you. So I decided not to put any of them there right now. Okay. So I'm just going to go to Blackboard for a second. There we go. Are there any questions so far? Now that I'm in the chat and I can see it a bit better. The next one I did was the legacy of residential schools in Canada, and we did this one last year. And this is a very current and relevant topic. So I'm going to go back and show you. I'll try and go through these a little bit faster so we can look at some of the actual tools. So you can use like Scoop It, Linoit, and Padlet, and some of the other tools that I've used. Oops. Sorry, it looks like I hit something that I shouldn't have. Okay. Susan, are you seeing the screen? I can't tell.
Yes, I'm looking at the legacy of residential schools in Canada. There's a black box. There we go. It's finished, and that's just a lag in.
There. Okay.
Yep, we're here.
Okay, so it's just lagging. Sorry. Okay, so I was working 2 grade 5-6 splits last year, and these teachers wanted to look at the legacy of residential schools and how they could approach that with students. So again, I was looking for some provocations to get them thinking. So I found this really great YouTube video by Justice Murray Sinclair, who was head of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And he has a really great little video talking about reconciliation and what it really means. And I pulled this quote out from the video, which I thought was really timely and relevant for the kids. Okay, it's not about taking, you know, blame for stuff that you didn't do in the past. Is about what you're continuing to do to contribute to the oppression or injustices that are still facing Indigenous people today. So we had some great discussion in class about that. I also found another YouTube video that gave a really great overview of Canadian history and the Indian residential school system, but also sort of explored the treaty history within Canada and how it led to a lot of injustices faced by Indigenous people and the Indian residential school system. I won't play these for you right now, but you can go back and look at them later. Some really great stuff out there. So when I went to phase 1 exploring, this time I didn't use Scoop It. I used Padlet as a different kind of sorry, I just saw another question by Melanie. Melanie, yeah, we were concerned about the topic. We had a lot of discussion ahead of time, just because these kids are young, but how do you broach something that is a sensitive topic but still needs to be addressed in the curriculum? So when we talked about some of the abuses, in particular the sexual abuse, we were really careful how we broached that topic and how much detail we provided and how much information we shared with students. My concern is also to, at any given time, you're dealing with kids in a class that maybe have been sexually abused themselves or abused in some way, and I'm always a little concerned about potentially triggering students. The teachers I worked with were very confident about their students being able to handle the subject matter. Parents were also informed that this was something we were going to be discussing in class. So we ended up not having any problems. Sometimes kids would ask questions a little bit more detailed, and we just judged on the basis of their maturity level if they were going to be comfortable having some of the answers. Does that make sense? Okay. So I use Padlet as a curation tool as well, and I'm going to show you how to use Padlet if you haven't used it before. I've largely used it as a word wall, kind of like what I did with Linoit before, but then I thought, you know, this would be a really great way to curate resources as well. So I started doing that this time. So these are all just websites or PDFs or maps or things that I found that were really interested related to residential schools in Canada. And so I just posted this, and this just allowed kids to go through and explore different information sources for residential schools. I was really conscious too of who was telling the story. I was really looking for Indigenous voices to be telling the story of residential schools. With history, it's always whose perspective, you know, who's telling the story, and it's really important, I thought, for the kids to actually hear from survivors and the Indigenous communities as a whole. So the first one I actually posted for the kids, and I kind of used it as a provocation, was this residential school of Canada. It's like a map of all the different, I wonder if I can make it bigger. Sorry. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. So I put this up for the kids because I wanted them to understand how many residential schools were in Canada, because I was kind of astounded when I first started doing a lot of this research. I mean, I was aware of residential schools, but not to the degree that I probably should have been. So it shows you each of the spots in Canada. And this, sorry, I got this map from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission website. They have lots of great resources. So it showed you all the different places. And if you go scroll down below, it tells you where they were and which church ran them. At that time, most of the churches ran the residential schools. The government had given them permission to do so because it made it easier for them, I believe. And some of the things the kids were asking were, you know, well, why were there so many residential schools out west? And I thought, well, that's a really good question. Why do you think there would be? Well, some of the kids made the connection that a lot of this had been Crown land that had been converted to farming, right? So there was a way to get rid of Indigenous people living in these communities so the land could be taken over for farming and European settlement. Okay, so that's a really great tool to sort of get them thinking about things. For me, I like all the different First Nations in Canada. Now, this one was in particular Ontario, but I didn't know that there was this many First Nations communities in Ontario. So I thought it was really helpful for the kids. And I got this particular map from Service Ontario. They have lots of great free stuff that you can just download. Another great resource to get them wondering and thinking about things, if it will load for me. This is a treaty map, so you could see all the different treaties that the First Nations communities had with the various provincial and federal governments. Okay. And again, I got this from Service Ontario. A lot of it, I just went and did some searching, and that's part of my job as a digital literacy support teacher or teacher librarian. Okay. And again, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has lots of great resources. And at this time, the Chaney Wenjack story was coming out with Gord Downey's work, and so there's a lot of stuff out there that I was able to get. Susan mentioned in the chat there's some really great books. When I Was 8 is a great story. I actually found a YouTube video that's just someone retelling the story of by Christy Jordan Fenton. You know, there's Heritage Canada, there's Minutes, there's all kinds of great stuff there. And I used this as a way to sort of curate information that was coming up and for kids to be able to read. Something like this even too for them, which was really eye-opening. So it will open for me. So this is a typical day at a residential school. So I wanted the kids to understand what that would look for, okay? Oh, I'm sorry, Buffy. I didn't realize it was lagging so much. Maybe I'm going too fast. Okay. Anyway, so that was the tool I was using, Padlet, as a curation tool instead of Scoopit. Okay. Hopefully everyone's back on this screen. Okay. So once they had time to explore some of the information and sources I put in the residential school Padlet, I asked them what they were wondering again. I was working with 2 different classes, so I created a Linoit board for each class. I'm just going to go into one of them. And hopefully it loads. So I wanted them to put any things they were wondering about what they had read. As another little hook, in the top left-hand corner, I put a little quote that I'd found. The legacy of Canadian residential schools, you know, the odds of dying for children in Indian residential schools was 1 in 25. The odds of dying for Canadians serving in World War II was 1 in 26. I thought that was really a powerful quote for them to think about, and for adults as well. So they were allowed to post whatever things that they wanted. And I'm going to be honest, when you have this Linoit board that you share and the kids are all anonymous and can post, they will be silly and they will post things that they probably shouldn't. But we have that talk about being a good digital citizen and to not post things that were hurtful or derogatory in any way or offensive. So if you're looking at the screen, there's lots of different questions they're asking. One of my favorite questions that the students asked and caught on very quickly were that why did the Indigenous students, and it's important to note it wasn't just First Nations that went to residential schools, there were Métis residential schools, there were Inuit residential schools, and First Nations residential schools. And they were all very similar but had slight differences. This particular student had noticed was that one of the very first things that happened to them when they went to the residential school was they had to cut their hair. So we had a really great discussion on why they would have to cut their hair to come to school. And I had another student pipe up when we were having this discussion. He goes, well, you know, when you go to jail, they make you cut your hair. You know, or when you go into the Army, they make you cut your hair. And these were connections that kids made right away on their own. So we had some discussion, well, why would they make someone cut their hair if they go into the Army or in jail? And, you know, we had discussions about, well, it creates a uniform of sorts, right? You're not an individual, you all look the same. It's a way of breaking your spirit. It's a way of, you know, asserting power over someone. So already we're getting some really good questions coming up for kids. You know, why weren't they allowed to talk in their native language? Okay, why was school more like a work camp for them? You know, they were only at school for half the day for subjects, and the rest of the time was working or sustaining the residential school, farming, that kind of stuff. So they were generating some really good questions on their own at this point. I'm going to go into phase 2. Sorry, I'm just being conscious of time. So I had them go to our virtual library, and I sort of highlighted different databases or encyclopedias they go to. And I also found other websites that I thought would be very interesting for them to look at, like Where Are the Children? The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada is a great site. It's still up and running, and they have lots of resources if you're looking for that. The third link I have there, the Residential Schools Photographic Collections. This is Canada's Library and Archives site. They have tons and tons of pictures there that you can use as digital provocations in your classroom to get you started. Pictures of residential schools, students, that kind of thing. I did manage to find one website that dealt with Inuit experience of residential schools. Historica Canada, Secret Path, Residential School Runways. There's lots of other sources out there that you could share with information. And instead of having them go out and just search the web, I curated resources for them. And again, they had developed questions. I wanted them to be able to synthesize the information and see if they had actually answered the questions and decided how they wanted to share their learning. Okay. So this was the actual assignment. These two classes approached it differently in terms of how they wanted to showcase their learning. One class each student chose to do a slideshow of their learnings. The other class did an interesting take, I thought, in that they had done a lot of work in class on digital posters and media literacy and how to create a really effective poster to communicate your learning on any subject. And so their task by their classroom teacher was to design a digital poster on an aspect or a couple aspects of residential schools and how you would communicate that learning. So they had to take everything they learned, decide what was the most important that they wanted to communicate with students, and they created these digital posters that they then shared with their classes. And again, I didn't post them here because I don't have their permission to share that with you, but that's what how they chose to share their learning. Oops. Okay. The next one, I did the role of government and responsible citizenship. I'm not going to go through all 3 stages. I'm just going to show you a couple of the resources I used to get them going with this particular topic. Hopefully everybody, let me go back again. Sorry, I'm just seeing your question now, Melanie. How I handle that, and that's a really great question because when you're doing inquiry, that's exactly what happens. You have a student who will ask something so specific that you can answer the question in like 5 minutes, or you'll get a student who will ask a question that's so incredibly big, you know, that you couldn't possibly answer it. So that's where we would go back. Before we let them go on to the investigation phase, we make sure they've developed good questions that they're going to be able to answer. So there are times where we have to go back and say, you either have to narrow your topic down or your focus, or we have to expand on it in some way. That takes a lot of work, and this is, to me, the part of inquiry where I am sometimes pulling my hair out because it can be very frustrating. And I'm going to be honest to you that a lot of students don't like the inquiry method of learning because they like to be told what they need to know. So just tell me what I have to find out, as opposed to having to develop a question that's going to lead to those higher thinking skills. Yes. Yeah, it is, you know, because, you know, I had one little guy who he wanted to look at the whole structure of mental health supports in Canada and related to Indigenous people, and that's just not something we could do. Like, the scope was too big, so we just narrowed it down. Okay, so you want to look at mental health supports. Okay, let's relate it to Indigenous communities. Okay, let's make it smaller. Let's look at the Inuit community. Okay, and let's make it look take a smaller look at that and you know, maybe tailor it to youth, ages 11 to 17, okay? And that's how you drill down for it. It is painful, and Susan's right, it really is deep learning. It's deep learning for you as a teacher, and it's deep learning for the students. And part of why I do inquiry too is I want to avoid those projects where students, you give them a task, and I still see this in a lot of schools. Okay, you're going to study polar bears, for example. And then the kid goes out on Wikipedia and copies everything about polar bears, sticks it on a poster, and then hands it in. Whereas to me, when approaching inquiry, I'd say, okay, you're interested in inquiry. You want to do an inquiry on polar bears. You're wondering about them, but what are you wondering about? Okay, maybe you're interested in the loss of habitat and how it relates to polar bears. Or maybe you read an article where polar bears are becoming increasingly coming further south. You know, they're leaving the northern climates. They're looking for food and the impact that has when they come into contact with people. You know, so you try and get them drill down and get them to focus on something that's a little bit more meaningful, and it avoids those issues of them just plagiarizing or giving you that poster on, you know, Bristol board that they've just completely cut and paste from the internet. Okay. Melanie, yeah, a lot of guidance into developing questions. They fill out the graphic organizers, and a lot of it's, okay, you go back and we have to keep working on this question. Phase 1 with the exploring and developing questions is the most important phase of the inquiry, and I spend the most time on it, because if you don't do that part, the rest of it doesn't follow. It just doesn't happen, right? You get these kids who, again, aren't able to answer their questions. There are times, though, when we get to phase 3, where we're actually in the processing phase and trying to put it together, and then we have a student who realizes they haven't answered their question. And sometimes we don't always catch it as teachers either. We think they're on track, and then we realize. On a positive, sometimes kids have gone off on a different tangent and developed a really good question on their own, and it turns out really well. So for the role of government responsible citizen, this focus for this class was what it meant to be a responsible citizen in relation to being a steward of the earth, you know, a good citizen that way. So I'm just going to show you a couple of things here that are great tools. So I found a couple of videos for them to watch about what citizenship is. I found a quiz that's really fun for how Canadian are you. And then another thing that I thought was fun that I tried was the Canadian Practice Citizenship Test. And this is put out by Richmond Library in BC. And it's the practice citizenship test that all newcomers to Canada have to take. So myself, the classroom teacher, and the students all took this quiz to see how we would fare as, you know, born and raised Canadians, and we didn't do too well. And that just got me thinking and got the kids thinking of the things that we do to people new in Canada, the expectations we have on them to, you know, be the perfect citizen and know this. And I say that as someone who taught history for a long time, and certainly Canadian history. We didn't do too well on it. I'll just click on it to show you what it looks like. If it will load, yeah. So it's Richmond Public Library, so you can pick the province you live in and ask how many questions that you want to ask, and then you can show you what it looks like. It's kind of fun. And again, this is just a hook and get the kids thinking and engaged in the topic that we're going to do. So that's just some of the questions they ask. And some of them I actually had to really think about. Get back. I'm just going to go into the exploring because, as Melanie talked about, this is the most important phase of doing inquiry. One tool I like to use is Edpuzzle, and I didn't put a link there, and some of you maybe have heard of it. It's edpuzzle.com, and this is a fabulous resource. I should have put it in my links. Totally forgot about it. Edpuzzle is a tool that you can use where you can take videos that you've made or you found on YouTube or wherever, and you can edit the video in some way. So you can either shorten it, or say there's a long video that you want to use and you maybe only want, you know, 30-second clip of it, and then you can edit that, or you can add quizzes to it. To be a tool for kids to remember information or quiz themselves on it. Edpuzzle works well with Google Classroom for any of those that are using it. So you can you create an account as a teacher at edpuzzle.com, and you can get videos that are already made and teachers have already created them or other people, and you can link it to your Google Classroom and post in there. I really like it. I'm just going to show you a little clip. Hopefully it will play. And this is one that was already created with built-in quizzes for me. And this is what I mean about using tools that can just sort of foster what you're trying to do in the classroom.
Elaine, I don't think the video is going to, well, it does a lot of refreshing.
No?
It's probably better, yeah, it's probably better
to
share the link to the video and folks can watch it on their own.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do that. Anyway, if you're looking at the screen, you can see these little question marks there. What that does is there's little things in the video where it stops and sort of gives a quiz to the kids, and we just did this orally. And the kids sort of fostered the learning that had already taken place about the different levels of governments, okay? I just wanted to highlight Edpuzzle is a really great tool to use with the kids. There's lots of already pre-made content on there for you on just about any topic. So I encourage you to check that one out. I also found another YouTube video that we talked about the character traits of citizenship. I use YouTube a lot for my tools. And again, great things to check out. Just in the interest of time, because I realize I'm talking too much, I'm going to go back and look at the slideshow. Okay. So I want to talk about some of the tools that I've been using and have used in my presentation. So the first one is, a couple of them you can see on there, Symbaloo, Scoop-It, Linoit, Padlet, Teaching Kid News, and looks like I kind of messed up this slide there. Kids should see this. The links that Susan will post in the chat are all links just how you can go and create your own account for any of these tools. But I'm also going to show you what they look like in how I use them. I'm just going to go forward for a second. Also embedded in the slideshow that you all have the link for, I've posted tutorials on how to use any of these tools, like video tutorials, but I'm not going to play them now because, as Susan said, it probably will not play well for you. Maybe I'll just show you a couple of two new tools I really like. A couple of weeks ago, I took a OTF webinar with Tina Zita. Some of you maybe took that with her as well. And she showed a really great resource called Kids Should See This. And so I've been using it more when I'm trying to find videos for kids to either provoke their learning in some way, hook them in, or just I'm looking for videos for kids to be able to learn how to do something. So this is a great resource. So I'm just going to pop out and show that to you. Oh, Susan's put the link in there as well.
We can also have people go out and have a look at that and then come back.
Sure, would that be better?
So, and then come back.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah. And there's a timer, like we could give them 2 minutes or something, and
sure.
How does that sound?
Sure, that sounds great. And then people can play and ask questions. And then if there are questions, I can take them to my sites and show them in more detail how to do things, if that works for people. I can see the chat now, so feel free to ask any questions too. Okay, Becky asked, I think it was Becky, that asked a question about Scoop It, a really good question. When you're using Scoop It, the free version only allows you to curate 2 topics at a time. You can pay for the paid version. I think you can get up to more, I think 5 or maybe more. There's different levels of subscription. So I use the free version, so I only curate 2 topics at a time. You can get it around it a little bit if you have more than one Gmail address that you could put in and potentially create 2 different dashboards. You can follow as many topics as you want, but in terms of actually you curating your own topic, you have 2. And how I share the link is I just make it public, the link that I want to share, and then you can embed the link into Google Classroom, or maybe you will make a QR code to share with kids, or I'll post it actually in the Knowledge Building Center or Google site I'm using and put the link that way. I don't know if that answers your question, Becky. When I first started using Scoop It, it did allow you up to 5 curated topics, but they've caught on that, you know, they can start charging people money for it, so I get it. Melanie, that's a good question. It depends on how much time the classroom teacher that I work with is willing to devote to the inquiry, because sometimes I'm only meeting with them once a cycle, depending on what they have. I would spend the most time on the phase 1 exploring, and if that maybe takes a week, then that's what it does. It depends on how quickly they are getting through and developing their questions and how much experience they've had doing this. Students who've done this work before, it's not so time-consuming, because if you spend the most time on phase 1 exploring and investigating, the other phases kind of fall into place. And you're right, sometimes the kids will work at their own pace and finish their inquiry at different times. Depends on how in-depth they're going with it. Robert, what are the benefits of Linoit over Padlet? I find the younger students can use Linoit a lot easier than Padlet. I tend to use Linoit for posting the questions, kind of like a word wall, if you like, and I've now started using Padlet more as a curation tool to find links and post them there for students. Older students, when I'm working with grades 7 and 8, sometimes I'll use Padlet, but again, it's also just personal preference. Some people really like Linoit better than Padlet. Hope that makes sense. Symbaloo is another curation tool that you can use. It's just basically a website bookmarking tool. And so you can go out and curate topics or blogs and stuff and just put them in one spot that you can then, they're called web mixes, and then you basically take that web mix and you can embed it into a website or just share the link with them that way. Oh, Buffy, this is actually a template which I will get to as well. It is created by the Ontario Library Association. It's created in old sites, and it's a template that is in the slide deck that I'll get to in a few minutes. So it's already created for you, and then you can just adjust however you want. I had emailed Google through their Google Sites forum and asked if they're ever going to create the ability to create a template in new sites, and then I will create a template in new sites. I haven't had anyone get back to me yet, but I can show you, if we're ready to move on, I can show you the template. Let's go. So again, these next slides are just, you have the slide deck, so you can go back and watch the tutorials on how to create and use any of these particular tools. So this is Together for Learning KBC Inquiry Template. This is created by Carol Cushlan. And so there's the link, Susan will put the link in the slideshow, or sorry, chat at some point. I think I'm talking too fast and she's trying to get everything in there. So this is a template that you can use over and over again. As far as I know, Old Sites isn't disappearing anytime soon. Again, I've not been given definitive answer about when I will not be able to access this template anymore. I'm hoping it will continue to be around for a while. So if you click, if everyone can sort of click on the link there, and you should be able to create the template. And you can customize it however you want. You can change the background, you can change the phases. For example, you maybe follow a different inquiry phase model, maybe something out of natural curiosity or some other model that you like, and then so you can customize everything to make it. I just like it because it's already created for me in Sites. Sites can be a little bit finicky for any of those who've ever used it before. There are other knowledge building center templates to try as well. They're all very similar, but there's other ones. If you don't like that particular template, there's other ones that you can use as well. That we, all the links will actually work in the slide deck that I shared with you at the beginning, but Susan's also posting them in the chat for you to look at. I'm just going to go back to that one. What's nice about this template is in each of the phases, it will tell you what each phase is and what the purpose of it is as well. Why I like using this particular template is because it's a great framework for students to work in, but as a teacher, it's really a great framework for me to gather my thinking when I'm approaching inquiry. Because it's really easy to just give the kids a topic and then boom, get them into investigating, and then we wonder why they're struggling to answer those questions, as Melanie referenced earlier, where they've got a really vague topic or it's too narrow. If we spend some of that time at the beginning, we'll have much more success when they come to do their research later. So it's a really great framework for me to remember, okay, I've got to do the exploring phase. Got to get that done. Hi, Angelo. No, you can't have the slide deck. I'm kidding. Of course you can. Glad you could join us, Angela.
So why don't I answer Simone's question? So yes, Simone, first of all, the links are all in Elaine's slides, and you have the link to Elaine's slides. But this whole presentation is also being recorded, and that includes the chat, and all of the resource links that are in the chat are going to be part of a resource page, which is on the OTF website, and you will get a link to that in an email tomorrow. So lots of ways of getting all of these great resources.
And you have my contact information. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Susan.
Something else, Elaine. I was just thinking that all of the templates are Google sites, and if you're not somebody who's comfortable using Google sites, has never used it, doesn't really want to use it, the nice thing about those templates is that you could also click on each of the different phases and take that information and then share it with your students in a format that you are familiar with, that you are comfortable with. It could be on a Google Doc, it could be on a chart paper, it could be, you know, in some other way other than a Google site. Google sites are not difficult to use, but it is another new learning. So if that is overwhelming you at all, just share with your students in some other way that you are comfortable with.
Absolutely. I do know some teachers who really like using Weebly or other websites they're comfortable with, and they just take in the information, the phases, and just put it where they want to use it. Some are using Google Classroom as a way just to post links for phase one. Here we're working on phase one next couple of days. Now we're going to be working on phase two. Some are not doing it online at all. They're doing it completely face-to-face in the classroom using the phases, and that's perfectly fine as well. take what you want from this and use it in your classroom in a way that works best for you.
So having said all of that, I'm kind of curious, for those of you that are here tonight, how do you see yourself sharing these phases if you're planning on using it with your students? Would you use a Google site? Would you use Google Classroom? Would you put it on a chart paper in your classroom? I'm curious. Feel free to put that in the chat or pick up the mic if you'd like to share with us.
I should point out, I did a workshop at our board a couple weeks ago, and there was a teacher there who just took everything that I showed her in the template and just put it into new sites in a way that worked for her. So it doesn't look anything like what I've shown you, but she's used it in a way that benefits her and her students. She's actually using it for Genius Hour, which I thought was really interesting. She's taking the phases of inquiry and applying it to a Genius Hour project that she's doing with her students, because she didn't want it to be a free-for-all where they're just going off and doing an investigation. She wanted some kind of structure. So for the kids for Genius Hour, they're still using the phase 1, you know, exploring their topic, developing questions that are going to guide their 20% project, their passion, and then going through that way. So that's another way to use the template, or like the phases of inquiry, I should say. On the screen now, I have also posted some great resources to support inquiry. These are books that I use quite a bit. The QTAS one, Susan's putting a link to the most recent version of it. There's a newer version out there right now. But these are so instrumental in helping me develop a lot of my resources and my approach to inquiry. Absolutely fabulous resources. And if you're looking to get started with approaching inquiry in this manner, start small. You really could take all the 4 phases and develop it in a quick activity that you do in the class, in a day. It doesn't have to be a long thing. It's just about thinking about how you're going to approach the inquiry. Phase 1, how are you going to explore the topic? Phase 2, how are you going to investigate it? Phase 3, processing and synthesizing. And then how are you going to share your learning? Inquiry doesn't have to be an 8-week project, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
And as Elaine's mentioned, one of the cruxes to this is having the students learn the difference between thin questions and thick questions. And I used to teach gifted learners, and we used to do questioning every single day. Start of the day, we would have, a news article or something, and the students would have to pose questions that were, we used to call them little think and big think, but same idea, critical thinking, problem solving, higher level thinking questions, as opposed to fact-based, thin questions. And they just then get used to it when it becomes something that they're always thinking about on a regular basis. And then it's not such a struggle when you come to do an inquiry project. They've spent so much of their schooling answering simple questions. Yes, cue charts are awesome for that.
Cue charts, the question matrix, so a lot of people use. Some people use de Bono's 6 hats, thinking hats, to approach inquiry as well, to develop their questions. That's another focus you can do. Sometimes teachers talk about, surface questions and, digging deeper questions. When I go in, I often try and use the language and terminology that that particular classroom teacher is using. So if they're using surface questions, whatever. I did work with one of our area enrichment classes, and she had developed her inquiry method using de Bono's hats, right? Because that's just, she'd already done a lot of work with her students in there with that about any kind of questioning. Buffy, it really depends on what the age level you're dealing with, how big you want the project to be in terms of how many questions they're developing, exploring. For most of them, I find picking 1 or 2 thick questions to answer is more than enough. As Susan said, they need to do the thin questions, the surface questions first to answer that, like the who and the what, and then we spend time trying to develop at least 2 thick questions. And again, it depends on the class you're dealing with. The younger students, it's maybe 1. With some students who really struggle with this type of learning, we're lucky if we can get 1 really good thick question. Oh, good. Susan's posted the link for de Bono's 6 thinking hats. It's a great way to approach inquiry, too. It works nicely with the phases of inquiry that we've got through the Together for Learning document. Yes, absolutely. And this is great that we're sharing all the different ways to approach developing questions because you don't have to pick or choose one or the other. You know, there's no one way to do this. You can take any of the things you already use and just make it work how you need it to. Oh, you're very welcome, Sharon. On my slide deck, I've got my contact information too, so you can certainly email me if you have any questions about anything I've shown you tonight. Buffy, I've usually used it for each child developing a question they want to answer about a topic, but you could certainly do it as a whole class as well. I've never tried that. That would be really interesting, actually. Maybe starting off doing it with the whole class answering one question would be a great way to dive into it.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt because I just saw Sharon's thank you and good night message. So just before everybody goes, Elaine, thank you so much. There's an absolute wealth of resources that you shared with us tonight. So I really hope that everybody has some opportunities to dig into some of these themselves and also with their students. Just some incredible resources. So thank you so much, Elaine. I really appreciate all your work, and I'm sure everyone else has as well. I'm going to move ahead, and then I'll move back to this last page, and it's not 9 quite yet, so if you still have further questions, you're welcome to ask them. So what will happen for a couple of you that are new, when you quit out of Blackboard, your browser will automatically open up a new window with a link to the feedback. It's also live on the screen there, and I'm also going to post it in the chat. And it's really important that you do the feedback for Blackboard, for OTS, as this is what helps to determine what we offer to you in the future. And it also drives the funding from the Ministry of Education. So we thank you very much for doing that. Some of you probably also collect certificates in a professional portfolio of some kind. So once you've done the feedback, you can complete a certificate and print that off for yourself. The resource page is there, but it's not done yet. I'll be working on that after the session tonight and including all of the links that Elaine shared, plus a couple of extras that came up during the session. So I'll be putting those on there as well. If you're interested in upcoming webinars, Syria, who is our OTF Connects coordinator, is busily creating our schedule for January to May. So there's all kinds of new things arriving every day. We were talking a lot about graphic organizers. I know that there's one coming up next week on Mindomo, which is a ministry licensed graphic organizing tool, which has some great opportunities for this kind of work as well as others. So you may want to check that out. I think it's on Wednesday night. I think I'm moderating that one. And if you're taking an AQ course in math, technology, or kindergarten, you are welcome to apply for up to $450 in funding. So that's kind of a nice little incentive for people who are taking courses. I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you to all of you for attending, and a huge thank you to Elaine for sharing her wealth of knowledge and information for all of us. So thank you, and I'll turn off the recording and we'll continue with any questions.